you for tuning in to the ALMA 2020 Chat and Chew author interviews. I'm Rebecca Vanook, the Executive Director of Library Reads. One of the things I've missed most this year is getting to bring you fabulous author panels at live library conferences. I am grateful, however, that we've still managed to find a way to try and connect you with these great authors and their upcoming books. Special thanks to the Adult Library Marketing Association for inviting Library Reads to take part in these interviews. This is video 2 of 2 featuring nonfiction authors. Please feel free to reach out to the various library marketing teams for more information. You'll find those contacts on our website, libraryreads.org/resources. Thanks so much for joining us for these brief author chats. We hope you enjoy them. Tori Telfer is the author of Lady Killers, Deadly Women Throughout History. Her writing on the culture of crime has appeared in The Believer, Vulture, Smithsonian, Vice, TheAtlantic.com, and RollingStone.com. She is the host of the podcasts Criminal Broads and Why Women Kill, Truth, Lies, and Labels. In her latest, Confident Women, Swindlers, Grifters, and Shapeshifters of the Feminine Persuasion, Telfer offers a thoroughly entertaining and darkly humorous roundup of history's notorious but often forgotten female con artists and their bold, outrageous scams. The art of the con has a long and venerable tradition, and its female practitioners are some of the best, or worst. Confident Women asks the provocative question, where does Hushpa intersect with a uniquely female pathology? And how were these notorious women able to so spectacularly dupe and swindle their victims? Hi, Tori. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I would like to dive right in with your upcoming book, Confident Women, Swindlers, Grifters, and Shapeshifters of the Feminine Persuasion, which is coming out in February 2021 from Harper. Can you tell us what the book is about?
Yes, so this is a book about real life con women. So confidence artists who are women, and they span the centuries. So the earliest one is from Marie Antoinette's time. She actually swindled Marie Antoinette, and some people think kind of kickstarted the French Revolution, no big deal.
Nice.
And some of the later ones are still alive today and in jail. So it really covers all shapes and types of con women across the globe and throughout time.
Very cool. So your first book, Lady Killers, profiled female serial killers.
Yes.
And then you run the podcast Criminal Broads. So obviously this is a topic that you are well-versed in and you enjoy.
Yes.
So I kind of have a two-part question for that then. So how did you get into this as a subject specialty? And then where did the idea for this particular book come from to profile female con artists?
Sure. Well, sadly, I don't have some morbid story of how, I don't have a great aunt who was a serial killer. As far as
see, that would have been like perfect.
Maybe I should come up with
Maybe you do.
Maybe I should do some digging. No, I just have always been into history and writing and fiction, actually. And I went to grad school for fiction, and then I discovered the world of nonfiction kind of late and became a freelance writer and pitched a column about female serial killers to the website The All. They don't exist anymore, but some people might remember them. Anyway, that was just kind of a random idea I had because I had just discovered this one female serial killer, and I couldn't believe that there were actual female serial killers. And when I got into it, I was like, wow, this is history. This is juicier characters than you'll ever find in fiction. Like all my loves are here. The only problem is a lot of people die and it's very morbid, but beyond the gore, there's a lot of cool, fascinating, I should say, psychology and detail. Anyway, so yeah, it has become a theme of my career. And the idea for this book was I was just thinking about types of female criminals for obvious reasons. And I was thinking about female bandits, but those have kind of been done before. And then this was right, I think, when the Anna Delvey story was breaking. She was that Manhattan heiress who was actually not any of that. And the story was just coming out. And anyway, I thought female con artists, oh my gosh, most of our famous ones are male, just like with serial killers. So I did a little digging, and there are so many more than people have heard of. You know, Anna is just the tip of the modern iceberg.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So you mentioned that your background was fiction writing. Do you have a novel spinning around in your brain anywhere? Do you think you'd like to switch over sometime maybe and take some of these characters and give them your spin maybe?
Yes, I would like to switch over,
Very cool.
Abandon nonfiction. I shouldn't say, but travel down that road. I would love to. I don't know if I would want to write about these characters though, because I almost feel like after, researching them as much as possible, it's like, what more is there? I don't know that I could add anything.
Yeah.
But yes, I still love fiction. It was my first love after all.
Very cool. Well, good. We'll look forward to that. So speaking of research, you just mentioned, so the book, as you said, travels from 17th century France to modern day United States and all points in between. So what kind of research did you do when you were writing this book?
Well, it varied, of course, depending on the era and country I was finding myself in. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it was in newspaper archives, a lot of which are online, which is like, thank you, archivists everywhere. Right. I feel like I have it so easy compared to writers of the past. So a lot of ProQuest searching, a lot of newspapers.com. And then let's see, one of the most modern women in the book is a Chinese con artist named Wang Ti. So I actually worked with a translator. Because,
interesting.
Yeah, I knew that there was, it just happened practically. So I knew there was material out there, but there was very little in English.
Okay.
So I worked with a translator who my brother ended up marrying, completely irrelevant to the book.
People love these little tidbits. This is exactly why I love these interviews.
It's like, I call her my translator, but she's also now my sister-in-law. But like my book didn't bring them together. I wish it had. They went to the same school. Anyway, so that was great because she was able to dig up, she's Taiwanese, so she was able to dig up, original sources and correct me on embarrassing cultural errors. So
that's really great.
Yeah, so if I'm working, it was the same with Lady Killers. I had a Russian woman and I worked with a Russian translator because there gets to a point where you just start feeling uneasy, like in over your head, Yeah. There's only so much Google Translate can do for you.
Right.
So yeah, and then I'm trying to think if there are any, and then I guess one thing that's really different from my last book is I actually did interview some people for this.
Oh, cool, yeah.
None of the con women though, which is a huge disappointment, but people don't want to talk to me for maybe obvious reasons. I don't know if they thought I was gonna just slam them, but But I talked to the son of a con woman and a detective and multiple detectives and lawyers, and so there is some original reporting in there too. It's really all over the place, but hopefully in a good way.
Well, I think that makes for a really good book though, when you've got all that background and all that firsthand research. So that's really awesome. Cool. All right. So finally, I realize this is kind of like asking people if they have a favorite child, but can you tell us, do you have a favorite woman from this book? Or do you have someone that you hope people will really kind of like, this is the one that the juiciest perhaps, or what do you think? What would you like to tell us?
Well, I'm really glad you compared it to a favorite child because that is always how I feel.
I know, right?
When I say that, I think people look at me weird, but you clearly understand. They're all special in their own deranged
Exactly.
Yes. I have, I want to give you like 5 answers, but I know I can't. I'm going to say I'm really excited for people to read the chapter on Rose Marks. She is alive today in prison, finishing up a 10-year sentence. She's the one I spoke to her son and the detective who chased her down. And I feel like I did the most original reporting in that chapter. I also leaned heavily on the reporters who covered her trial when it was happening. So I didn't break the story, and I think that because it happened pretty recently and I was able to talk to people involved, I like to think it reads pretty immediate, and it's about fortune telling. So there's a lot of weird details.
Very cool. That's a good hook. That's a good hook. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending time chatting with me today. We of course wish you much success on this book, but it sounds like, you know, people are really going to gravitate to it the way that they did to Lady Killers. So congratulations.
This is fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Amelia Pang is an award-winning journalist who has written for publications such as Mother Jones and The New Republic. She has covered topics ranging from organic import fraud to the prevalence of sexual violence on Native American reservations. In 2017, the Los Angeles Press Club awarded her first place in investigative journalism for her undercover reporting on the exploitation of smuggled immigrants who are recruited to work in Chinese restaurants. Amelia grew up in a Mandarin-speaking household in Maryland and holds a BA in literary studies from the New School. In 2012, an Oregon mother named Julie Keith opened up a package of Halloween decorations and something fell out that she wasn't expecting. An SOS letter, handwritten in broken English by the prisoner who'd made and packaged the items. In Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods, Pang pulls back the curtain on the labor camps that create the countless goods we purchase in the United States. The book follows the life of Sun Yi, the Chinese engineer who wrote the note after finding himself a political prisoner, locked in a gulag for joining a forbidden meditation practice and campaigning for the freedom to do so. The story Pang uncovers is a call to action, urging the American consumer to ask more questions and demand more answers from the companies they patronize.
All right. Hello, Amelia, and thank you for chatting with Library Reads today about your book, Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and how it got started?
Absolutely. It's about an American woman named Julie Keith. She's this normal suburban mom who lives in Oregon, just outside of the suburbs of It's a suburb very close to Portland. And she was gifted some Halloween decorations that a family member got on clearance from Kmart after Halloween one year. It was extremely, extremely cheap. I think after the clearance discount, it was only about $5. And the only reason they got it was because it was super cheap. And this family member didn't even need it, and she gave it to Julie as a gift. And because Julie didn't even really need it either, she just put it in storage and actually forgot about it for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And when Halloween came and went, she didn't think of the decoration. The next year's Halloween came, and she finally remembered, oh, I have these to me a few years ago, and I was shocked to find an SOS message from the person who made her decorations, who turned out to be a forced laborer in China. And the note actually read, "This product produced by Unit 8 Ma Sinjia labor camp. People who work here have to work 15 hours a day without Saturday, Sunday break. Otherwise, they will suffer torture." And this note was actually one of several SOS letters that a political prisoner named Sun Yi risked his life to write and sneak into the decorations that he made. But it appears that none of the other letters were ever discovered, or at least not publicized. So perhaps they're still sitting in unopened packages, impulse purchases that consumers bought for no other reason than the fact that they were on sale and they were cheap. So my goal with this book is to tell the human stories behind our cheap products. And it's, Suni's letter is not so unique in this sense, because there's been several of these SOS letters found in recent years by American consumers and European consumers, and as well as consumers in other developed countries. And they've been found in all kinds of brands, not just necessarily the cheap stores like Kmart, but also high fashion brands. And it really, Yeah, but I wanted to.
Fascinating.
Thank you. I think I wanted to focus on his story in particular because there were many extra chilling qualities about his story. You know, the fact that it was a Halloween decoration.
Right.
And the fact that he was not a criminal, he was a political prisoner. I thought he had a compelling story. And I thought I could use his story, the lens of his story, to tell a larger story about us and our consumption culture.
Right. So what influenced you to get into investigative journalism in the first place? Like what made you want to go into it?
I've always been interested in investigative journalism. Well, when I first started out with journalism in about 2011, it's not interesting. I mean, sorry, it's not an easy industry to get into. So when you're just starting out, and investigative journalism is a good way to really make a brand, make a name for yourself, and get published. And so one of the first investigative pieces I did was to go undercover at a Chinese buffet, which hired exclusively undocumented Chinese and Latinx immigrants. And they were paid very, very little. They made $800 a month, and they worked 12-hour shifts for sometimes 7 days a week. And it's also a story about the human costs behind our extremely cheap bargains. So this is Made in China is an extension of that theme.
Great. So you specialize in narrative nonfiction. Could you give us some insights on your research and writing process?
Absolutely. So this was a research-heavy book, which is sometimes kind of dry. There's a lot of, it took a lot of, I had to sift through a lot of documents, whether it was custom records and, the history of these labor camps and the history of even congressional records, American congressional discussions about these labor camps. The US government has known about these camps for decades, and there are laws that are preventing these products from coming into the US is very weak still. So this is very fascinating to me, but it can sometimes come off as dry, maybe to a regular reader.
I don't think so. I was very captivated.
And so I really wanted to find some kind of a narrative arc to tell this, to convey this information. As a story with really, really compelling human elements, like this political prisoner.
Absolutely. So what were some of, if you would like to share, what were some of the challenges that you encountered in writing this book? And how did it differ from your other compelling topics that you've written about in your previous articles?
Good question. The most challenging part was actually doing reporting in China. For a part of the book focuses on my.
So when you actually went to China, that was like being there.
Right. Yes.
Was a challenging part.
I went there and I sat outside some of these camps and followed the trucks to see which factories they were going to and tried to trace which companies were sourcing from these factories. And that was difficult because I wasn't entirely sure if I made the right decision to go on whether it was a tourism visa or a journalism visa. If you go on a journalism visa, you have a lot of protections if you get arrested by the police.
Right.
They might try to stop you from doing your work, but they're not going to imprison you or seriously hurt you. But if you go as a tourist, you can get away with a lot more reporting. You can get away with not being followed, but you could get into a lot more trouble if you do get arrested. I figured I wasn't going to barely get any reporting done if I'd gone on a journalism visa. I might not even got a journalism visa. But I did go on a tourism visa in the end, and was just terrified the entire time. But it turned out just fine. I got a lot of advice from journalists who have done similar work in China about how to stay safe, and it is possible to do.
Nice. I mean, that's amazing. Like, and you had to pose, right, as like a business person. And I'm like, wow, that's like a lot of, um, a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
So, can you share with us a particular part in the book that stood out for you and that you want your readers to pay close attention to?
Yeah. There were two parts of the book, or two particular paragraphs that when I was writing it, it brought tears to my own eyes. I had a really hard time processing it. Just reading these interviews about how difficult life is in these labor camps.
Right.
On the other side of the world. One was because Sunni was a political prisoner, he was actually a religious dissident, and he was often tortured because they wanted him to denounce his faith. And he, at some points, began to lose his sanity because the torture was so intense, and that was really, really difficult for me to write and to try to picture what it must have been like experiencing that. And another scene that really, really made me emotional as I was writing it was of the Uyghurs who are in the education camps right now.
Right. And you're of Uyghur descent.
Yes, I'm part Uyghur. I'm part Chinese and part Uyghur. So the oppressor and the oppressed exist in me at the same time. So interesting dynamic.
Well, perfect person to write this book then, I guess.
Thank you. And the stuff that they go through in their camps is also extremely, extremely disturbing, but also important for people to know.
Of course. Okay, so you provide a lot of action points towards the end of the book. Now, I want to know, like, do you foresee any changes to those action points in light of, COVID and the lockdowns that are happening right now? Because, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely less, even with the trade war, there's been less products from China coming into the US, but it's still a lot. The New York Times broke the story that our PPE equipment were made by Uyghur forced laborers.
Yes.
So it hasn't really, it might have diminished the amount of made in China products that was coming up. It's, in my opinion, there still needs to be a stronger legislative action.
Wow. So that's all I have for you, Amelia. It's a fascinating book. I was riveted from beginning to end. I was like, just, it had like that visceral feeling for me. And we just want to thank you so much for sharing details about your book. And your book, Made in China, is going to be published in February 2021 from Algonquin Books. And we wish you great success.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I just want to say I'm a huge fan of libraries. One of my favorite places to go as a child, and still a place that I love dearly. And this is very meaningful. It's such an honor to talk to you guys.
Kimberly Jones is a former bookseller and now hosts the Atlanta chapter of the popular Well-Read Black Girl Book Club. She has worked in film and television with trailblazing figures such as Tyler Perry, Whitney Houston, and 8-Ball and MJG. Currently, in addition to writing YA novels, she is a director of feature films and cutting-edge diverse web series. She also regularly lectures on working and succeeding in the Atlanta film market. Her first book, I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, came out in 2019. A breakdown of the unfairness of economics and issues of our social class structure facing Black people and other marginalized citizens, Jones's next book, How We Can Win, will expand upon statements she made in a viral video posted in June 2020, following the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police. Through personal experience and observations, she illuminates the economic disparities Black Americans have faced for generations and offers possible solutions to combat them in a system that is still rigged.
Okay, I'm Jessica Trotter. I'm on the Library Reads board, and I am really happy to be joined by Kimberly Jones. Thank you for coming and spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having me. I love library reads.
Okay, so I will say, in prep for this, I watched your viral video yet again today, and it has not stopped making me cry.
Oh, sorry.
It's that frustration and, well, everything.
All of it.
So can you talk a little bit about just doing the video for the first time and your experiences with that?
Yeah, it was interesting because it's funny, you know, we talk about how like traumatic moments impact us. But I think a lot of times we don't talk about how just plain old like hurt feelings impact us in a very deep way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a year prior to recording that video, I did, well, not a full year, but months prior to recording that video, I had organized a community cleanup in my neighborhood. At the time, I was living in Bankhead, which is a marginalized, impoverished part of Atlanta. And so I just noticed trash everywhere all the time, and I never saw sweet streeters coming down our street. And so I made this like Facebook event where I like asked people to come and clean up, and there was this amazing nonprofit organization that gave me free like trash bags and brooms and stuff like that. And I reached out to the city and was able to get a dumpster out. And I kept advertising and posting it and advertising and posting it. And I had people signing up and saying that they were coming. And then on the day of the cleanup, 3 people came, or 3 or 4 people came. And so my goal was to clean these 2 really long major streets. And so we barely got halfway through the first street because it's only 4 people. And I'm thinking we're gonna have like at least like a dozen people come for this community cleanup. And it just didn't happen. And it really hurt my feelings and struck me in this really raw way, because I felt like I was watching so many people on my Facebook giving lip service to like wanting to do the right thing and like wanting to participate. And I'm like, here I am offering this amazing thing because contrary to popular belief, like trash in your environment not only has like an aesthetic issue of making you feel down, which it does, but it also causes like harmful disease and breeds rats and you know, disease carrying insects and things like that. And so I'm like, this is about the beautification of the community, but this is also about the health of the community, right? So it rung really deep for me. And so when people didn't show up in that space in that way, I'm like, who are all these people on my Facebook talking about what can I do to help? And like, no one showed up to help. And so I was hurt by that for a long time. So fast forward to the day of the video, I was doing some man on the street for a documentarian that I know, and I was interviewing all these people, African-American people who were downtown Atlanta, cleaning up the area. And they all had a very similar narrative of, you know, this is not the way, you know, I don't want to see this happen in my community. And I noticed that it were people who looked like they had some economic privilege. They were African-American, but they definitely had some economic privilege. And so I don't think that they were experiencing the unrest in the way in which marginalized people experience it. And so it's like the narrative of let's focus on the riots and the looting and not the police brutality and the police murders and, you know, the disenfranchised voters and economically disadvantaged people and redlining and, you know, the educational caste system that we have here in the US and all the things that make people boil to the point of the civil unrest exploding in the way in which we saw it. I just felt like at that moment they were focusing on the wrong thing. And so then to go back to my original statement, this feeling of hurt from people not showing up for the community cleanup I organized was like, I organized a community cleanup for us, by us, to clean our community for our own, you know, for our own sanity and safety and hygiene, and no one showed up. But here are all these people to me, the way I was feeling in that moment,
Right.
to me, doing this front facing of, I'm not one of them. I'm not one of the bad ones who destroyed the community. I don't agree with that. Let me show you I'm good. Let me show you there are people that are good. And I'm sure some people were down there genuinely just wanting to say, hey, this is how I can participate, is by cleaning up
Right.
In my city. And I get that. But in that moment,
Right.
what I felt was, y'all out here, this is my Black auntie voice now.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all out here cleaning up these white folks' streets, and I couldn't get y'all to clean up our streets. And then he turned the camera on me, and that video is what you got.
Wow. And I mean, it was just, it's a powerful video, obviously. We, you know, we've all seen it. I'm hoping if you have not seen it, please go see this video. But now, fast forward a little bit, you have a book coming out next year.
Yes.
That is kind of jumping off from that. Yes?
Yes.
Can you tell us about how that's working?
Yes. So the book, How Can We Win? Basically what it does is it kind of is, it's very anecdotal as to like where I see things and how I see things. But really, I'd like to think that the book is hopeful, right? I feel that the book is hopeful because what I'm trying to say is, up until this point, the way that African Americans have felt in this country is that we're playing a game that's fixed, that's rigged against us, that there are all of these like actual laws and systems that were literally put in place in order to keep us impoverished. And really, they were put in place during post-Reconstruction because Black people were pulling themselves up by their proverbial bootstraps and getting themselves together. We had 13 lawmakers during Reconstruction. Public education, as you know, it was created by those 13 Black lawmakers. And so this, people say we never got our 40 acres and a mule. We got our 40 acres and a mule. We got it through the Freedmen's Bureau. The issue is when President Lincoln was killed, all of that was reversed and that land was taken back. And so what I'm trying to do with the book is show two key things, which is one, how did we get here? Because that's the piece that we're not being honest about. And as long as we continue to be dishonest about how we got here, then it's going to be very difficult for the powers to be to empathize and understand why there needs to be legislation, programming put in place specifically for Black people, because there were laws and systems specifically put in place for Black people to make sure that we didn't have equity. The civil rights movement fought for equality, as they should have. But this generation, this BLM movement that we're seeing now, really what we're fighting for is equity in a country that has been our country, but we have not been allowed to be equitable players in it. And so that is what this fight is about. Like the SNCC and those guys, they got us a good chunk of equality.
Right.
Now we have to get ourselves with this movement a good chunk of equity. And so it just kind of like tells that story, but it is hopeful in saying this is how we can do it. Like it's not as far-fetched as you seem. Yes, it's going to take some time and it's going to take some legislation and some dollars and some people stepping up and us recognizing which organizations are doing the work and supporting them in a real way. But we can fix this. We can turn this around, because by and large, contrary to popular belief, Americans as a nation really just want us to be whole and happy.
I thank you. And I apologize. I'm blanking.
No, I do it all the time, girl. I understand. I'm like, what was I talking about? Of course, I'm older than you, so there's that.
I don't know about that, but so you grew up in Chicago area?
Mm-hmm, I did.
So how does your background kind of built to what you're doing now and your views of what's going on?
It's funny because I grew up in a very interesting state in that you hear a lot of Black people talk about code switching in this nation, transitioning from a Black world to the white world. And I didn't really have to do a lot of that growing up. I did have to do code switching in the sense of of floating between marginalized and poor Black people and wealthy bourgeois Black people.
Okay.
That's the two sides of my family.
Okay.
And so, you know, I was the kid who I went to a school where I went to a we call it grammar school in Chicago, K through 8. I went to a Title I school. But meanwhile, I came from a 2-parent home and my parents both had decent jobs. And the pocket where we lived was a nice middle class neighborhood, but we were trapped in by poverty, gang violence, a drug epidemic on 3 sides. So it's like our neighborhood, which was it's an area called Roseland, but our little section is called Pullman, was like middle class Black people. But if you went north, south, or east, it was highly, saturated with gangs and drugs and things like that. If you went west, though, you got to upper middle class people in Beverly. Okay. So I grew up in this, but all Black folks, right? And so I grew up in this like melting pot of like being around people who were super impoverished and being around people who had done super well for them and people who were doing okay. And I had to interact with all of them between my schools, my church, my community, my program. I was completely interacting with everyone all the time. And so that's where my code switching came in. It was like, all right, I hang out in the hood over here, and then I'm gonna walk 6 blocks up, and my friend's dad is the state surgeon general. You know what I mean? And so having that type of like interesting lived experience of like literally living the truth of like Black people are not a monolith was my upbringing. And my mother was like the queen of after school programs. So I went to after school programs at the DuSable Museum, which is an African-American museum in Chicago. I went to after school programs at Push Rainbow Coalition. I went to after school programs at the ETA, the Ebony Theater Association, which taught me all about Black theater, music, and art and dance. And then several of my homies was in gangs. I went to like 4 funerals of teenagers before I graduated high school. I witnessed my first murder when I was 15. And so I had this like weird, Black people are definitely not a monolith lived experience, to where that's kind of become my song and cry, is that Black people are not a monolith. I just wrote my debut novel, I'm Not Dying With You Tonight. I wanted to express that hood girls can be heroes too, because I refer to myself as hood adjacent. I feel like I understand that lived experience. And so, I wrote that, but my new novel that I'm coming out is a girl who has the kind of family where they put her in Jack and Jill, and her mom is in Lynx, and her parents are both members of the Divine Nine. And so knowing all of that is my cry for my people, is just like, we are so varied and beautiful in every way. And even when you go into the hood, like it was like when I went 4 blocks east into the hood, like I remember the candy lady who, if I didn't have enough money, would let me still get the cookies. And like, there's a lot of love in the hood, and nobody talks about that. People only paint it as a place of despair, but people are sitting outside on their first porch laughing and being kind to each other and taking care of each other, and understanding that Mr. Johnson over there is no harm to anybody. He's just a retired vet who has some mental health concerns, and he probably just needs you to walk him home. He's not a threat to you. But to people outside of our community, he's a threat to them. And this is who I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for the Mr. Johnsons, because you have not even tried to engage to learn our lived experience. You don't know that he's harmful. I'm fighting for the young Trayvon Martin, who's just a kid walking around with a hoodie with a candy, and does not need a desired warrior to jump on him and then shoot him when he's losing the fight to the child. And so I want people to see, it's sad that I have to say this, our humanity.
Yes. I mean, but it is sad, but yes. Yeah. I do get it. Thank you so much for this. I am so looking forward to getting my hands on this book.
I am super excited to finish it before Henry Holt fires.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much for spending some time with us today. It's been lovely.
Oh, it's been lovely. Thank you so much. I'll come back anytime you guys want.
Okay.
Danielle Geller is a writer of personal essays and memoir. She received her MFA in creative writing for nonfiction at the University of Arizona and received a Rona Jaffe Writers Award in 2016. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, Brevity, and Arizona Highways, and has been anthologized in This Is the Place. She lives with her husband and 2 cats in British Columbia, where she teaches creative writing at the University of Victoria. Danielle is a member of the Navajo Nation. After Danielle Geller's mother died of withdrawal from alcohol during a period of homelessness, Geller used her training as a librarian and archivist to collect her mother's documents, diaries, and photographs into a single suitcase and began on a journey of confronting her family's history and the decisions she'd been forced to make, a journey that will end at her mother's home, the Navajo Reservation. An accomplished writer, Geller turned this into Dog Flowers, a memoir, creating a deeply moving narrative of loss and inheritance that pays homage to our pasts, traditions, heritage, and the family we are given and the family we choose. Okay. Hi, Danielle. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I would like to dive right in with your upcoming book, Dog Flowers, a memoir that's coming out in January 2021. And could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so the book sort of opens with my mother passed away in 2013, and I'm sort of like first walking into this trip to go down when she's in the hospital. And I am given the things that she has, or I start going through the things that she has in an old boyfriend's house. And that's when I first discover her diaries and her photographs sort of spanning the years, and like letters between her and her family. So the book really is about two sort of like parallel things. It's growing up, you know, with my mother and my sister, with my grandmother for many, many years because I didn't grow up with my mom. But then it's also me sort of trying to process these artifacts, or like this archive of hers that I've been given. And I'm writing about a family history of alcoholism and trauma and all of that, while doing sort of like those 2 things, like reinvestigating or rediscovering my relationship with my sister and sort of learning some things about my mother for the first time, and trying to process all of that.
So you have links on your website. I checked that out, to some of your essay work, which is very moving. It's very personal, really enjoyable to read. So how did you come to the point in your writing life when you decided to turn to writing a full book instead of, I know some of you, the essays that you've got on there talk a lot about your family and about your heritage. And so what kind of made you decide, there's so much packed in here, it's gonna have to be a book? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it actually started as a book.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So about 6 months after my mom passed away is when I started writing the book. And I was working at MIT. I was a cataloging assistant. And I just started calling out of work all the time. And because I was just writing, I wrote, you know, like 12, 14 hours a day, some like most days. And for 2 months, that's all I did was write. And so after that period of 2 months, I had a draft of a book that was like 87,000 words. It was quite a lot. It was big. And that's what I took into my MFA. And that's what I was working on in my MFA. And while I was there, while I was like discovering new forms and like playing around with like how to organize a life into sort of like a coherent narrative, that's when I started drafting some of those essays, was actually trying to figure out, you know, like what belonged in what form, like how can I tell this story? And it wasn't until after the MFA, after I met my editor, after I started working on the draft, that it sort of shifted away from an essay collection and back into something like a memoir.
That's awesome. I think people really like to hear about that process, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
And, you know, and I think readers probably don't really think that much research goes into writing a memoir, but in your case, so you are a librarian by training, and your memoir is not just your story. It's the story of your mother, of your heritage, of the Navajo Nation. Can you tell us a bit about your research process and how that informed your writing? This wasn't you just sitting down saying, okay, I'm going to tell the stories that I know. You actually really dived deep into the things that your mom had left behind. And I know being a librarian, you know, that kind of probably drives you to do a little more research than most writers would. So tell us a little bit about the research behind it.
Yeah, so I had a couple of different processes when it came to my research, and one of it definitely was tied to those documents, that archive. And a lot of my, you know, my first impulse, which was a weird one, when I had my mom's things, was to like get a storage box and then organize it into manila folders and then label all the folders.
That's the librarian in you.
Yeah,
Right?
and like arrange the dates or the diaries chronologically where I could. And it was very, and I think it was because I didn't really know how to deal with that situation. I was 20, how old was I? 26, 27 when my mother passed away. So I was pretty young, or like I felt young, certainly. But so a lot of my research obviously was learning how to enter into those documents. And I read a lot of documentary poetry, especially as I was working on a book, and that have informed, in addition to like my archives and library background, the way that I was approaching them. And the questions I constantly had to ask myself was like, you know, are these documents like evidence of something? Is there some sort of objective truth here? Or can I only interpret these documents through my own subjective experience? You know, like, am I misusing these or mistreating them? And so I had a lot of like ethical considerations. It was like a conflict, because there's some things that I write about that I know my mother wouldn't want me to write about. Like I know that, you know, things that she didn't tell me because she didn't want me to know. So, you know, like I had to decide what I was willing to show and what I wasn't willing to show, and how I was willing to write about it and how I wasn't. And so a lot of that went into my research process. And then there were like other, you know, there was a lot of like site visiting, like going places and being places. My my thesis advisor, Andrew Munson, at one point I was writing about this series of negative images, and sort of the unifying thing through most of them was this concrete grill that my mother had built. And it was when there was like a lot of complicated family relationships. Like my mom was dating my uncle and my dad was with this new girlfriend, but they were all living in this one house. And so they were all four of them like posing around this grill, and it was like showing the grill being constructed. And he was like, oh, you should go on like the quest for the grill. Like, you know, like you should go back to Florida and like
the holy grill.
Like see if you can find it in someone's backyard, because it was like built with like concrete blocks and rebar. And I like, you know, I did go back to Florida. I went to go see one of my sisters. I visited the park where my mom was living when she had passed away. I revisited some of my old neighborhoods. I did try to find the grill and I did not find it. And you know, like, because everything has changed, and I remembered quite a bit of my way around, but so that became part of the research process too. Was I did do some of that, like visiting places and re-inhabiting old spaces. And then, you know, having many difficult conversations with my family. That was another important thing. I know that some people are like, don't show your family anything before it's done. You know, like you don't want their voice like intruding. But it was important for me to have some of those conversations before anything was final in any way.
Because it's their story too, right? I mean,
absolutely. Like it's not mine alone.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that with us. Can you tell us the significance of the title? What are dog flowers?
Yeah, so the title, it's always been Dog Flowers. When I went to see my mom in the hospital, her things were all part of, or they were being kept by or held by her ex-boyfriend. And so he had invited me to come over and look at everything. And the morning before I left to go back to Boston, we were just like talking, and he like brought me into the backyard, and he was showing me the garden that they had, and she had like told me about their garden, because we always had a garden growing up. Like I've always had a garden, and his roommate's dog was just like digging in the earth, just like digging and digging, like he was having a great time. And as we were like walking back into the house, he like pointed out these like muddy dog prints on the ground, and he said, your mom used to call them dog flowers. And it was just like so heartbreaking and so beautiful, and really I think captured the way that my mother inhabited that space, like her ability to see beauty in people and in places that sort of on the surface were not beautiful, you know, like where life was hard and difficult.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's really, that's a nice detail. Thank you. So to wrap it up, what do you hope that readers will take away after they've read the book? What would you like people to think or feel after they've read your memoir?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple things. One is that what I was doing in the book, and I think it was a really hard thing to sort of balance, but I was resisting this idea of like forgiveness or any kind of reconciliation. You know, my mother passed away and I didn't have a conversation with her before she died. And so there's never going to be that moment of reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And also, you know, there's this feeling on one side of my family that it's best to try and just like put this all behind you, to forget it. And neither of those things are possible for me. And so the book is really about trying to find a way to live with this history, and to find a peace with it when it's still like there with you.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. We absolutely wish you so much success with this book, and we're sure it's going to be a big title. So hopefully, yeah. So thank you so much for talking.
Thank you.
All right. Rebecca Carroll is host of the podcast Come Through with Rebecca Carroll, and a cultural critic at WNYC, where she also develops and produces a broad array of multi-platform content and hosts live event series in the green space. Rebecca is a former critic at large for the Los Angeles Times, and her personal essays, cultural commentary, profiles, and opinion pieces have appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Guardian, Essence, New York Magazine, Ebony, and Esquire, among other publications. She is the author of several interview-based books about race and Blackness in America, including the award-winning Sugar in the Raw, Voices of Young Black Girls in America. Surviving the White Gaze is a stirring and powerful memoir recounting Carroll's painful struggle to overcome a completely white childhood in order to forge her identity as a Black woman in America. Adopted at birth by white parents, Carroll grew up the only Black person in her rural New Hampshire town. Her early childhood was loving and idyllic, and yet she couldn't articulate the deep sense of isolation she increasingly felt as she grew older. Everything changed when she met her birth mother, a young white woman who consistently undermined her sense of Blackness and self-esteem. Her memoir explores the tension between the aching desire for her birth mother's acceptance, the loyalty she feels towards her adoptive parents, and her search for her racial identity. Intimate and illuminating, Surviving the White Gaze is a timely examination of racism and racial identity in America today, and an extraordinarily moving portrait of resilience.
Okay. All right, I'm Jessica Trotter from the Library Reads Board, and I am joined by Rebecca Carroll, whose latest book, Surviving in the White Gaze, is due out on February 2nd, 2021. I finished your book last night, and it was quite a neat read. Could you tell the viewers a little bit about it?
Well, did you say it's quite a neat read?
Yes.
And do you mean neat like tidy, or neat like
no?
Yeah, because it's not tidy.
No, it's not tidy. I don't mean it that way.
You know, it is ostensibly about being adopted into a white family and raised in an all-white town, and navigating
an all-white world, and being, you know, sort of responding to the pull, the sort of visceral pull to Black folks and Black community and my identity as a Black woman. And just you know, jumping a lot of hurdles and navigating a lot of emotions. You know, it's also further, it's further complicated by the fact that I met my birth mother when I was 11, and she is a white woman who was quite controlling and had an idea about who she wanted me to be. And I was very, very young, obviously, and so really struggled to balance my desire for her acceptance and love, and a sense of loyalty to my parents, while also just looking somewhere for a North Star of Blackness.
Right. Neat was the wrong word, but there are points where I could see parts of my background in it. And neat, not in that it was great things, but neat in that I'm seeing somebody who has some similar background. How did you, especially having read the book, how did you come to the point where this was the time to write it?
It was really about having my son. I mean, I knew that I wouldn't have the emotional fortitude or the foundation until I became a mother myself. And also, I think becoming a mother to my son and having him be raised in the city, in Brooklyn, and for his environment to have shaped so much of how he thinks and sees the world already. So, you know, there's the anecdote in the book about at the end, you know, him sort of responding to Michael Brown being shot in Ferguson, and just sort of like this sense of anger that I felt finally able to really just step into. And I knew that exactly what my voice was. And so that's when I felt ready.
Okay, that's very neat. Was it a difficult writing process? Was this catharsis? How did you?
You know, I think it was both of those things. I think when it started, I was like, I don't know how to wrestle or wrest this story into a linear narrative because there's so many moving parts. Mm-hmm. But as it turned out, I was a really obsessive journal writer. And so I had that, which was super, super helpful. And after, you know, I mean, I'm sure many, many writers have said this too, but after the first, like, really crappy first draft, you're able to see sort of little gems that you can link together. And at that point, it felt like, oh, I know exactly what the story is.
As people come away from this book, is there something you'd like them to get out of it, or?
You know, I think I really, really tried to be as radically compassionate as I could be. Families are complicated, you know, that's an understatement. But I guess I would like for white families and white people to think more about an immersion of experience that isn't their own, and to think about what it means to assume that it's fine to live your life without having any kind of engagement with Black folks or Black culture. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, just for everyone, you know, for Black girls, Black women, and just for really, it is a coming of self story. And so I think that there are definitely, you know, do's and don'ts for sure. But yeah, I hope it resonates with a broad swath of folks.
I think it's going to, because it certainly did with me. So I thank you so much for talking with us. We wish you so much success with the book.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for taking the time to view these author interview videos. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank all of our authors for spending their time with us, and I'd like to thank the various publicists and library marketing folks who were able to make these interviews happen. I'd like to take just a few minutes to direct you to our website, libraryreads.org. As you can see on our homepage, we always have the current list available. And then at the bottom is a link to download a clean copy PDF printable. We absolutely encourage you to use these for displays and library handouts. And speaking of these lists, you can head to our archive to find all of our lists going back to 2013. There's also a link on that page that will take you to the spreadsheet master text list of all of our past titles. You might find that a little bit easier to cut and paste from text if you're using our list information for your website, your social media, or your in-library displays. Our website also features our Hall of Fame section. This is something we developed in fall of 2018, deciding from that point on, when an author's third title places on the Library Reads monthly list, that author moves into our Hall of Fame. If you click on an author's profile picture, you will see all about their most recent Hall of Fame title, the previous titles that made the list, etc. Using other links at the top of our website, you can find out a little bit more about us and what we do. We also have a full FAQ page. You can find out what we're up to currently, and you can find out how to participate in what we do. There's information here on how to vote for Library Reads titles lists and how to use it if you are a staff member, or how to get involved if you're a publisher. There's also a link to our marketing materials, which we encourage you to use on your website, in your social media, or print out. We've also got labels there you can use for winning title books. And finally, you can check out our resources page, where you have links to our free training opportunities that we're continuing to develop, as well as what our publisher partners are offering. We announce most things via our social media accounts, which are linked here on our website up at the top. And at the bottom of every page is a link to subscribe to our email newsletter. I promise that we don't sell your info or spam you. We generally only send out a few emails each month, one announcing the monthly list and one that's a reminder to vote. So there you have it. That is the Library Reads website. Please take a look and learn more about us. Thank you so much for participating in Library Reads, and thanks for watching the author videos.